After the Frontier War, which would be the final war, the amaXhosa will be defeated and will never be a problem again. Bula then joins the northern column in anticipation of invasion of Zululand during the Zulu War under Colonel Wood. At one point it was decided that a black tribe, it was a clan under the leadership of Ukhamu. And Ukhamu was a brother of the Zulu king, but he had decided to defect to the British. The Zulu king had heard about it, and they were in huge danger. And Bula was sent out to escort these people to safety. And apparently Bula, from his horse, looking down at Ukhamu's followers, said, "What am I going to do with these verminous little brats?" Later, though, one of his staff members would say that on the ride back to Kambula, 6 little black kids were up on Bula's horse, clinging to his back. So I think within that grumpy exterior was a soft heart. Only a few days later, Bula would be tasked with dislodging the abaXhosa people from the top of a high mountain called Soban. Now, it's a fascinating story. We're not really going there except to say that things went rather wrong. And the Zulu army of probably 20,000 strong surprised them, blocking the only exit route from the mountain, and it's a high mountain. And Bula and the Frontier Light Horse and others had to gallop as best they could to the far western end of the mountain where there's a precipitous slope. You can't ride horses down there. Well, you can't ride horses down there unless there are 20,000 Zulus with spears running after you. Then you can. And the British make their way down what becomes known as Devil's Pass. And some of them will lose their horses. And the place will eventually be swarming with Zulus. And people are dying left, right, and center. And Bula rode to safety. When he heard that there were men at the foot of the pass without horses, he rode back into the Zulus, loaded them up behind his horse, and brought them out. And he rode back again. For this, he will be awarded a Victoria Cross. And at times when the award of such medals were often politicized, this one wasn't. In that same incident at the Devil's Pass, the leader of the small Boer contingent of volunteers who had joined, Piet Uys, was killed. And Bula only discovered this when he got back to the camp at Kambula. And when he was told this in the mess, he was badly shaken. And he said, that man, speaking now of the Boer leader Piet Uys, that man, morally speaking, was the finest gentleman I have ever met. Now that's quite something from a British blue blood to say of one of these much despised farmers. The following day, after the debacle at Devil's Pass, the Zulu army attacked the fortified British camp at Kambula. And it was Bula who at a particular point said to Colonel Wood, "Let my men out." And Bula rode with the Frontier Light Horse. And he goaded the right horn of the Zulu army, which was in the process of bypassing Kambula, to the horror of Wood, who was fearful that the Zulus would go on to sack the town of Utrecht. And Bula goaded them into making an attack that they'd been advised not to make. And that set up what would be the victory, and it was the beginning of the end for the Zulus. Because from that day on, the British would have the high ground. Bula would return to the United Kingdom, and shortly after the Zulu War, the Transvaal War of Independence breaks out here in South Africa. And it's a remarkable story in itself. Suffice to say that the British were worsted in the only 4 battles that were fought. In the Battle of Majuba, the British general was killed, and the war will be, a negotiated end will take place. Now, on the day of the Battle of Majuba, Bula arrived back in South Africa and journeyed up to the British camp below the towering mountain of Majuba, to the British camp at Mount Prospect. And I'd like to just read you the remark that was made by one of the women. You must remember that, of course, in Mount Prospect there was gloom. Many men had died. General Colley had died. And there was devastation at the loss of prestige and the loss of men. Early in March, Buller arrived at the Camp in Mouse Prospect in a postcard filled with choice food and fine wine, and lifted everyone's spirits immeasurably. And this was very much Buller. He was a man, I think, in the mold that Churchill would be one day. Only the best was good enough for Buller. And in the event, his physical shape would change because of this, but nonetheless. Buller would return to the UK without, although he got heavily involved in the peace negotiations and was instrumental in bringing this war to an end, he eventually would return to the UK, and he wrote a letter just before he left to his wife, and I think it's very significant. He said, "I never looked forward with any great keenness to fighting the Boers. We have condoned their offence, and I really like a good many of them. Besides that, they have in the long run justice on their side. It would also have been a war from which little credit could be gained, and which would have been an unpleasant one to fight out. For as the Boers had no strategic point, the occupation or destruction of which would render the continuance of the struggle hopeless, we should have had to reduce them by harrying their farms and burning their homesteads. Cruel work at the best of times, and very cruel against a much married and much scattered population like the Boers. So on the whole, I'm really glad that it's over." Prophetic words indeed. And that brings us to the end of the first of the videos that we're making on General Buller. And I will leave you with a good health. And next week, we'll pick up where we left off. Cheers.